Good evening, and welcome to WANA Live, the reading series of the Writers Association of Northern Appalachia. I'm your host, Damian Dressick. This is your other host,
Christina Fasonic from Wheeling, West Virginia. How are you in Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, Damian?
I'm just fine, thank you. I guess I could say I'm drowning in a sea of papers.
Yeah. That's the way it's going here too. So I can certainly appreciate that.
But we have a wonderful respite for any both faculty or student or just non academically aligned folks. We've got a wonderful reader tonight.
Yes, we do. And allow me to introduce her to everyone. Bobi Conn was born in Morehead, Kentucky, and raised in a nearby holler, where she developed a deep connection with the land and her Appalachian roots. She obtained her bachelor's degree at Berea College, the first school in the American South to integrate racially and to teach men and women in the same classrooms. After struggling as a single mother, she worked multiple part-time jobs at once to support her son and to attend graduate school, where she earned a master's degree in English with an emphasis in creative writing. In addition to writing, Bobi loves playing pool, cooking, being in the woods, attempting to grow a garden, and spending time with her incredible children. So let's bring her on. Hello.
Hi, you all. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Are you coming to us from Kentucky tonight?
I am, yeah. I'm in Berea, Kentucky, where I went to college. So
yes,
I stuck around.
Yes, a very well-known and well-respected college, especially amongst us Appalachians. So we are glad to have you on. And I think you're a first Kentuckian in a while, right, Damian? It's been a minute since we've had somebody from Kentucky on.
It has, I think, but we've been watching Larry Thacker's television program. So I feel like I'm getting a weekly dose of Kentucky.
Right.
Well, I'm glad to up the dose just a little bit more.
Right, we go.
Excellent.
So, what are you going to read for us tonight?
So, I am going to read an excerpt from my memoir, In the Shadow of the Valley.
Excellent.
And, I chose a selection from later in the book. This is from chapter 24, I believe. A little excerpt about my granny, because that's a lot of Appalachians have grannies who are dear to us, and I thought that would be a nice theme to bring to readers or listeners.
You know, it's interesting that you say that, because I remember when I first started teaching at California University of Pennsylvania, where I teach now, and I'm from Appalachia. I don't know why I needed this information, but a lot of the professors there told me these kids love their grannies, and they'll do anything they can for their grandmas. So if granny's sick, they won't be here. So I thought that was a really interesting thing to note, of all the things, to tell me about the students. That was one of the things that they thought was so important. So
that's really sweet. I love hearing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I look forward to hearing about your granny, and we'll disappear and be back when you're done.
All right. Thank you. So I just want to say real quick, the title of this chapter is The Cathedral. Granny didn't play music at her house, maybe gospel every once in a while, but not often enough to recall. Her house was clean, and it felt old and solid. The wooden steps that we loved to play on and that she didn't want us to play on were painted maroon. There was a window toward the bottom of the steps, which faced toward the mouth of the holler. Granny had a small mirror there and would put oil of Olay on her face while sitting on the steps. She kept her round hairbrush on the windowsill. Everything there was holy. Granny had a flock of chickens at all times. Of course, Dad sent me down for eggs when I was little. After I stopped being vegan, Granny started giving me eggs by the dozen, and I discovered their yolks were a deep orange yellow, rich from the bugs and worms the chickens must have found as they explored Granny's yard and fields. When we were small, my brother, younger cousin, and I watched while Granny killed one of the chickens. She wrung its neck, twisting the head right off, but the chicken's body still hopped around for a while. I stood behind the screen door of the kitchen, horrified and frightened, but awed by my granny's strength. My brother and our little cousin shrieked with laughter and ran around the yard. Granny's face revealed nothing about how she felt. She cleaned and cut up the chicken, cooked it with dumplings, and fed us all, as she so often did. When we spent the night at Granny's house, she made us go to bed early. In the summertime, it was still light out. She and Papa knelt by Granny's bed together. They hadn't slept in the same room since I was born, as far as I knew. And they prayed, heads bowed. Sometimes they both prayed out loud at the same time, words overlapping like waves coming ashore, almost together, one looking for the other. Granny often cried like she did at the altar. Sometimes I listened to them quietly, but if Granny was praying by herself, she had me kneel beside her, clasp my hands, and bow at the side of her bed with her. She prayed for us all, and from what I could tell, she prayed for us every day. I wish sometimes that I could have the strength she had, with nothing but her prayers to comfort her. Granny had the only kind of power a woman in that time and place could have, the power to transmute pain into comfort, absorbing untold sorrow and giving her family a safe haven. It was alchemy. I didn't know that we went to an evangelical church from a Pentecostal tradition. The Pentecostals I knew would speak in tongues and sometimes dance in the aisle, which made me laugh behind my hand because what are these grown-ups doing? Our church grown-ups mostly said hallelujah a lot, and there was some crying and the anointing with oil, which came with prayers that spilled onto me in a rushing, falling apart voice that made me think someone was maybe going to do something wrong. When I became a teenager, I asked Papa questions about the contradictions I found in the Bible. I'd read plenty of it on my own and quite a bit in church. I never got to talk with anyone about the things that didn't make sense to me, but Papa seemed safe enough to ask my questions now and then. I never argued with him, though. I didn't want to find out where his patience ended and his anger began. Papa corrected me as to why Jesus turned water into wine, not because it's okay to drink wine now, but because the water wasn't sanitary back then. And when I asked about Daniel, the most famous vegetarian in the Bible, he told me that story was about living excessively, not the harm of eating meat. I wanted to shake his conservative interpretations, but it was enough to have an adult talk to me like I could understand what they said. No matter how conservative their views may have been, neither he nor Granny talked about going to hell or who should marry and who should not. They didn't talk about politicians or race or the sin of dancing. They fed us and worked. Papa hunted squirrel and picked blackberries. Granny cooked and prayed and gave us money that we didn't deserve. And though later I couldn't go to church or believe in a literal interpretation of the Bible, and it would take years to undo some of the harm done in the church if it can never be undone, I knew my Granny and Papa to be the kind of Christians some politicians claim to be, the kind of people any of us could want to be. But there is no faking that kind of humility. You can't pretend to love and give and forgive like my Granny did. She didn't go around telling people how much faith she had or how good God was to her. I heard it in her quiet prayers. I tasted it in the food she grew, canned, killed, and cooked. I felt it in the softness of her skin, which grew loose and spotted with age, unprotected and unadorned. It filled her house and spilled into the creeks and waiting hillsides. It wrapped itself around me, and I held on to that when there was nothing else.
Wow, that's wonderful work. So evocative.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
While you were reading, I kept thinking about memoir, and memoir's my favorite genre, if you can have a favorite genre. And I was thinking about the importance of memoir as time capsule, and how, like, if we're not going, if we don't write about these things, then they'll be lost forever. They'll be lost to all of us forever.
Yeah, I think about that a lot too.
Did you guys lose me for a second?
No.
Am I back? Okay. On my screen, I was gone.
Oh.
But I was thinking about that the whole time, that the childhood that you had is very similar to the one I had with my grandparents. I spent a lot of time in the holler too. And I think that if we don't write that down, and if we don't try to capture it and communicate it to other people, we lose it. It's gone. Because who else is going to be
Caretaker.
the bearer of that information and that time period and that culture and those memories?
Yeah, I have been thinking a lot recently about how, like my granny's life was not one that would be considered newsworthy or noteworthy by the vast majority of people. But when I tell her stories or stories about her to my kids, like that's helping to create culture, and it's creating our family identity and helping my children understand their senses of self within this familial context and the cultural context, and the idea of like how many precious moments a person can have in a life, even if they are quiet and not that notable. To have them disappear just seems like a great loss to me.
No, I agree, absolutely. And it takes a bunch of grannies to keep the world going, right?
I think they're the ones that have been doing that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think too. I really like that you kind of create and dimensionalize through your grandparents this way of life. But not only that's valuable, but I also really like the fact that you kind of define that kind of in some way vis-a-vis people who are pretending, people who are kind of adopting this or putting this coat on as a lifestyle or a posturing. We're this. It's like, well, no, you're really not. You're sort of, picking up the trappings of this and trying to get somewhere with it.
Yeah. As I was working on this book, that's when I realized just how profound my grandparents' identities are for me. And I think, they're really meaningful because we do have so much, we have so many people, at least, if you turn on the news, there's, people who want to present themselves in a certain way, and it's disingenuous so much of the time, but people don't go to, my granny and papa, nobody went to them for their opinion on the latest, cultural phenomenon or political development, right? Because they're just simple people living their lives and working really hard and making a very quiet difference in their little corner of the world. Which of course, I think we need to focus a lot more on that. And in order to kind of, not saying that change doesn't occur like in the ways that we like for it to, like the big splashy change. But there's just so much important work being done just in families and quiet towns and hollers, especially in Appalachia.
No, for sure. And I think you're right. That idea of people being, wanting to talk the talk, but not walking the walk. And the trouble with that, of course, is that people claim that identity, or that it's really an affectation, I think. And then, without having lived that life. And I think that's shameful in so many ways, I mean, why pretend like you're somebody that you're not if you know?
Yeah, I thought I really relished my politicians dig when I got to work that into the line. I do think there's a lot of people are always grasping for meaning, and a lot of people, I think, struggle to feel like their identities have real meaning or significance. And so I do have some compassion for, when people take on or try to take on an identity that doesn't really fit. But then other times it feels like a usurping and that there's a displacement that takes place and that kind of thing. So
Here at the hedge fund, we're just plain folks.
yeah, just good old people, just like you and me. Mm-hmm.
I noticed you created a playlist for one of your books.
Oh yeah, that's for this one.
That is for yes, and you're balancing. I was really intrigued. You're balancing Amazing Grace and Waylon Jennings' White Lightning as your two opening tracks. I thought that was just fun.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I grew up going to this church that you all just heard about. So of course I heard Amazing Grace a whole lot, but my great grandpa was also a moonshiner. And I grew up hearing a lot of stories about him. So White Lightning was also a very prominent theme in my childhood, hearing those myths and legends and true stories about the legendary moonshiner in our family.
I think everybody's got one.
Yeah, I'm hearing more and more because my next book, my novel that'll come out in August, it's like a sort of a fictional exploration of what my great grandmother's life would have been like, being married to my great grandpa during Prohibition and the Depression. He was in and out of prison, and so as I've shared it with people and told them, I'm hearing a lot of stories about moonshiners. So apparently they were all over the place.
And still are.
And still are, yeah. I got some moonshine recently from an undisclosed source. So I actually got to consult with them, asking some questions so that I can have a couple of my facts, the details about the moonshiner in my book. I wanted to make sure they'd be historically accurate. So I had a moonshiner that I could call, but I was not allowed to credit him in the acknowledgments.
Yeah.
And you had to delete his number, right?
Yeah. And this talk never happened.
So we have some comments.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes. So this is my mom. Thank you, Mom, for listening and tuning in.
We said it was a family affair on this show, so there you go.
Yeah. My mom figures heavily into my memoir, and we're sharing a lot of stories right now, actually, as she's sharing a lot of her life stories with me so that I can write them down and make sure that they get preserved and, become part of our human history.
And we've got Karen Zachary saying my pop made moonshine too. So
that's amazing. And so pop, I'm wondering what, because we say papa and then grandpa in where I came from in Eastern Kentucky. So I'm always curious about how people, like the different words that people use for their grandparents, because there seems to be like regional differences,
Well, and ethnic differences too, because people from Eastern Europe have different names for their grandparents. And I mean, it is, I called one of my grandparents Pap and the other one Grandpap. They're both in the same place. So, Karen adds another quote. She says, that he had a drive-in and it's related to popcorn. Oh, that's fun.
Oh, nice.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Need to bring the drive-ins back.
Oh yeah, we've still got some hanging out in here in northern West Virginia, but not many, that's for sure. They're hanging on by a thread. So
Mm.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on this show. This was so fun. And it's always good to reminisce and meet a new writer.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to meet you all and learn more about your organization. And I'm just so grateful for the support that you all give to Appalachian authors and bringing us together. That's awesome.
Right on. Thanks, Bob. Could you maybe hold the book up just so people
Yeah.
get a peek at that? This is In the Shadow of the Valley, and this is available online in bookshops.
Yeah. A lot of small bookshops ended up carrying it in Appalachia. It's kind of randomly available. It was published by Little A, and it's easily accessible on Amazon, and you can go to my website and find it. And the front cover, a little fun fact, this is from a photo of my yard when I was a kid.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you again next week.
See you next week, everyone. Bye. Good night.